Hi everyone, welcome. So let's get started. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining. It would be really nice to get a sense of who is in this call. So if you don't mind introducing yourself into the chat, it would be really nice to just kind of get a sense of who you are, what you work on. I'm seeing some familiar faces, but some that I haven't met yet. So it would be great to hear about what you're working on and where you're based. My name is Pauline, and I'm really excited to welcome you here for the launch of this Apply Club in Sustainability. Before I say a few words about the club, I'm going to hand over to Olivia, who is our Apply Clubs coordinator for the EASA Applied Anthropology Network, who will give us a little bit of an overview of the Apply Clubs and how this club sits within that family of clubs. So, Olivia, thanks so much for being here, and over to you.
Thank you, Pauline. As she said, my name is Olivia, and I'm Applied Club Coordinator and current network convener of the Applied Anthropology Network along Simon's Provost. And the Applied Anthropology Network for over a decade now has aimed to promote the value of anthropological approaches in various sectors, as well as bringing people together that are applied anthropologists or want to be applied anthropologists all over Europe and beyond. We do this through a range of different activities. First and foremost, Why the World Needs Anthropology annual conference, as well as the Apply Clubs, which is an initiative that was started in 2021 by the convener at the time, Markus Rothmüller. And the goal of the Apply Clubs was more or less to bring applied anthropologists together that are either working in or interested in specific topics. So far, we have 8 such clubs on topics like the anthropology of finance, digital methods, or health. And today we're very excited to launch the newest club today, the Apply Club of the Anthropology of Sustainability, which is a really important topic. And we're so grateful to Pauline for the initiative of starting this club. We're looking forward to this event today and to all the future discussions and activities. You can find more information about the network on our website or by joining one of our upcoming networking meetings as part of the EASA conference in July. I will post more information about those in the chat, but I'll hand back over to Pauline.
Thanks so much, Olivia. So welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for making the time to come tonight, especially as it's such a nice day outside in the UK. But we're really glad that you're here. My name is Pauline Destry. I'm an anthropologist working in the field of energy and resource extraction in Ghana. I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Durham, where I teach on a range of courses in energy and sustainability. But in my journey into sustainability, the next chapter is actually, I'm an incoming lecturer in business ethics and sustainability at King's Business School. So I'll be taking anthropological perspectives and insights on sustainability to business students, which is really exciting. So it's my utmost pleasure to welcome you to this new community for anthropologists and practitioners interested in sustainability. Now, sustainability is everywhere, and it's often used to mean quite different things, right? I mean, it means a new attention to the environment, a new form of, or a new imperative to for new kinds of responsibility. It can mean a new form of resource management, a new way of valuing nature, or a questioning of what makes life livable for ourselves and for others. So this plurality of the words itself, of course, makes it a prime topic of interest for anthropologists, as we are always interested in diversity and translation across skills and meanings. So there is a clear anthropological interest there. And so this club came about partly because of this ubiquity of sustainability, but also because of a sense that while sustainability itself was everywhere in all those different forms and shapes, anthropologists weren't exactly visible in that field. And so, you know, the environment has long been a concern in anthropology, and we can trace that history in different traditions in anthropology. But really, as a field of practice today, it's largely absent from what we might call environmental anthropology. So that's the second point of interest in developing this club. Essentially, sustainability is everywhere, but where is the anthropologist in that field? And the third reason that this club came about is really more of an advocacy perspective. How can we as anthropologists or as people inspired by anthropology and by its methods play a critical role in sustainability as a new field of practice. And this isn't just about, making evident the importance of anthropology to this field, but how do we make ourselves indispensable to sustainability in industry, in policy, in business, and elsewhere? What is it that anthropology can do for sustainability? That's our guiding questions today, but it's really, I think, the guiding question for the club moving forward. What is it that anthropology should do? And of course, this is where you all come in, because this is what this space is for. It's about learning from each other, sharing resources, opportunities, challenges, and support. It's a professional network for anthropologists and practitioners interested in sustainability. So I'm really, really delighted to hear from you and to have all of you here to launch this new community. We're going to have, Olivia, can you change slide, please? Thank you. So this is just a quick agenda for today. We're going to have a roundtable with our amazing speakers, Anil, Safwan, and Natalie, who are joining us today and work on different aspects of sustainability and also engage with different circles outside of academia. And then we'll have some Q&As. And if you do have any questions at any point in our speakers' presentations or in the roundtable, please put them in the chat. And then we'll have Q&As where you can also unmute yourself and ask your question directly. If you do have the time, stay for a networking session from 8 p.m. Onwards, because it'd be really, really nice to actually get to meet you and hear about what interests you, why you've come today, and what this club can do for you. So I'll move on to introducing our speakers, and I'm going to start with Natalie, because she might have some technical issues of overheating with her computer. So we're going to start with you, Natalie, just a 3 to 5 minutes intro to your research, and then we'll move on to Safwan and Anil. So Natalie is a senior researcher in anthropology at the ENTPE, École Nationale des Travaux Publics de l'État, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
At the University of Lyon. She specializes in urban and rural mobility issues, as well as discard studies and energy transition, with a focus on energy and mobility justice. And her work also really focuses on the everydayness of the daily life of energy transitions and energy practices. She has lots of recent books, including Cycling Through the Pandemic, Energy Futures, Anthropocene Challenges, Emerging Technologies, and Energy and Everyday Life, which I really recommend, and Ethnographies of Power. So Natalie, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. So to present myself briefly, so I'm working kind of a specific position, which in France is quite common. I mean, we all have all those words positions. And so I'm working for the Ministry of Ecology in an engineer school, which is for civil works. So, civil engineering, sorry. And within this school, I'm in a lab that's working mostly on mobility issues. And so my work has been focusing over the last 20 years about what these issues bring into the life of people. How do we move around to try to live where we wish to live and work where we can work? And so through those issues, I've been questioning more and more the issue of sustainability through what the current transition, mobility transition, energy transition are doing to our life, the life of peoples, and how can practice changes. So that has been the main focus of my research. And more recently have been asked, and this is where more applied research comes into focus, to climate change adaptation. So I've been asked by to work with the scientists and the civil society working on the climate plan for Paris at 2050 climate plans, and also the one in Lyon, which is more about One Health. So trying to figure out how can the health of vegetation, the health of the animals, and human health can be, the three of them can go on, and what can we do to improve the health of everybody within the cities. And then the last issue, which is also related to climate change and transition, have been asked to work on the security, transportation security observatory, which is also tackling issue about how can people change, and what are the new mobilities vehicles that we can see bringing in terms of security, and how can we go along those in order to improve the security of everybody on the roads.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Natalie. I'll now introduce Saffron. Saffron Woodcraft is a Principal Research Fellow and the Director of Social Policy at the Institute for Global Prosperity at UCL, where she works on understanding the lived experiences of prosperity and inequality in East London, and where she has championed really innovative research methods that are citizen-led social science as a new way of generating knowledge and impact. And if you're not familiar with the work of the Institute for Global Prosperity, I really encourage you to check it out. They're really doing really interesting work around rethinking on metrics for economic and social well-being beyond GDP. You've published on the IGP Prosperity Index, which is a really interesting measure. So Saffron, really happy to have you join us today, and over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, and thanks very much for the invitation. It's really nice to be here. Pauline's introduced the Institute for Global Prosperity, but I'll just say a little bit more about our interdisciplinarity, because that really is a strong part of the work that I do. So the Institute is interdisciplinary in the sense that we work across academic disciplines. There's a lot of anthropologists in the department, but there are geographers, economists, and others. But all of the work that we do to kind of rethink what prosperity means in the 21st century, so taking account of tackling inequalities and thinking about environmental impacts and limitations, all of the work that we do kind of in that space brings together transdisciplinary partnerships. So research, innovation, kind of collaborations and partnerships that bring together citizens, local community organizations, civil society, various different kind of state levels of government in the different contexts where we're working, with business and academia together into these partnerships, because the scale of the challenge is so great that no individual sector can tackle these issues of kind of sustainable prosperity and thinking about environmental degradation, but also because a lot of the work, and I'll talk a little bit more about how my kind of individual research feeds into this in a moment, a lot of the work that we're trying to do is change thinking, develop shared evidence, bring citizens' kind of experience and lived experience into these spaces of policy creation, knowledge generation, and action, and to think about understanding what those obstacles are. So diverse forms of knowledge, which is obviously something that anthropologists are very good at generating, and thinking about lived experience, thinking about bringing indigenous knowledge and alternative forms of knowledge into these spaces is something that anthropology is known for. But the work that I do kind of takes those principles from kind of classic social anthropology, I suppose, and brings them into oh, sorry, it's very loud music outside my window, brings them into a context like policy making and governance in London. So these kind of urban contexts where we've got multiple different actors working together. So the work that I've been doing on sustainability looks very much at sustainability as a discourse, sustainability as a kind of policy construct, and then how it's operationalized, or how it's kind of like put into practice on a day-to-day basis by this multitude of actors that are all working in this space. So because a lot of my work is about regeneration as a form of urban policy, I look a lot at urban planners, at the kind of large-scale global corporations that are now doing a lot of work in city design and city planning, and how they think about sustainability, how they construct it, what the kind of parameters are around that, and then what that limits and what it allows. And then where there are disconnects between lived experiences of sustainability, community, inequality, where there are disconnects between what these concepts mean from a local perspective and how they're put into practice by all of these different actors. So one of the things I'm very passionate about is citizen science as a research methodology, which can bring lived experiences into policy spaces. So we can start to question things like, whose definition of sustainability are we talking about? Where is the non-human in this space as well as the human? Who then gets to act on and who gets to kind of act on and make decisions about what sustainability means and what it should mean. That's a quick intro, so I might just stop there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stefan. And I've got to say, if you have any questions about any of the kind of short introductions from our speakers, please just put those in the chat and we'll come back to them. So I'll now introduce our final speaker for today, Anil. Anil Tripathi is an economic and climate anthropologist who works on and in climate finance. He's an impact fellow at the MIT Climate and Sustainability Consortium and was recently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Bologna on the ERC Impact How project, where he worked on the morality of finance. Aside his research in climate finance, Anil is also a policy researcher and consultant for the Climate Bonds Initiative, where he works on shifting debt capital markets towards climate change solutions. So really excited to have you here, Anil, and yeah, over to you. And I forgot to say, I was checking out your publications earlier and really loving the graphic that you have about your PhD thesis, kind of turning insights from climate finance into a graphic form. So I'll put a link in the chat to that as well.
Oh, it's perfect. Yeah, thanks so much. And that was a collaboration with Matteo Farinella, who himself is a neuroscientist, his PhD in neuroscience, but has been always focused on science communication. And so, yeah, we worked with him and that How Finance University of Bologna project to try to figure out ways to depict our research in that medium. So it was a really cool project. And yeah, so as you can get a sense of from my bio, I've always been really interested in how sustainability exists from a range of different organizational structures. So my PhD research as an anthropologist began by trying to look at financial markets and their responses to climate change and sustainability. And so to do that, I ended up being very applied, building a career in climate finance at an NGO in London that was trying to track the development of the green bond market. So tradable debt that was trying to be marked as sustainable if it was financing public transit or water infrastructure or wind farms, solar farms, and whatnot. And what was really interesting in that market is that you have both governments, such as the government of France has issued green bonds, universities, MIT has issued green bonds, large corporations such as Apple also in the space, and all coming to this financial market, writing about why their projects were sustainable in certain forms, connected to corporate sustainability and other discourses. And so it was a really fascinating space to see how all these different types of organizations were writing and discussing their ideas around climate sustainability. And then from there at the University of Bologna for my first postdoc, I was looking at the government of the Seychelles in the Indian Ocean and how they're building around this idea of blue economy and blue finance to issue financial instruments connected to ocean-based livelihood. So it could be kind of artisanal maritime fishing, or other types of projects, building a marine conservation area. And so it's very interesting looking at that government approach to climate sustainability using financial markets. And then at MIT over the last 2 years, I've been looking at kind of a wide range of corporates across different sectors that are also trying to come up with their responses and kind of ideas of corporate sustainability discourse. And so I've been working with them in this consortium that's funded by companies, but where we also work with different departments across MIT. So the main group I've been working with is the Aggregate Confusion Project, which is primarily managed by economists, but then within the consortium, we have other sociologists, social scientists, chemists, and folks from a range of disciplines. And I'm about to leave MIT to join a innovation-focused incubator hub where there's also another range of startups, corporations, venture funds, all also working on sustainability from a wide range of ends. So for me as an anthropologist, I've always been fascinated getting into spaces that teach me about different perspectives and ideas of sustainability, which I think are very much dependent on the organizational structure that they're in.
Fascinating, and congratulations on the new job.
Thank you.
Great. Great. So thank you so much for your introductions. We're now going to move into this roundtable, which is really a very open question on what can anthropology do for sustainability. If you can all speak to that from your research, from your work, maybe focusing on one example from your work that speaks to that, that would be great. And then if all of you want to put any questions that you have about this in the chat, we'll then bring the questions to this roundtable as well.
Yes, I think I could start on that question. And I think really going back to that point about understanding how different organizations respond to sustainability, I think is a key insight that as anthropologists we can highlight by, as individual researchers going into different community groups, corporations, financial institutions, getting a sense of how sustainability is discussed there, and through our academic publications or other kinds of publications come together and document, what are all the different ways that this discourse is developing. And, as anthropology, we've always had this long history of trying to highlight difference in human society. And so I think by documenting the development of these different forms of sustainability, we can, in a sense, bring different discourses back to ground, right? When certain types of organizations, such as corporations or financial institutions, try to frame sustainability only in one way, that seems to build in a rigidity that really isn't kind of, I think, historically true for the term.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'm particularly interested in the relationship or in the spaces between discourse on sustainability and then what happens with policy and practice. And so much being in, and when I say practice, I mean what corporations are doing in day-to-day life, or what people who are not elected politicians or people actually making policy are doing on a day-to-day day-to-day when it comes to making decisions and investments and things like that. And I think anthropology has really nuanced tools for interrogating discourse and the kind of elasticity of terms and framing where and how those discourses develop and where they've come from. So a lot of my work has looked at sustainable communities in a kind of urban policy context and the evolution of this term through different kind of political cycles and different kind of political ideologies, and how it shifts from a space which was kind of predominantly occupied by kind of government actors and state actors into a different kind of economic system where you've got a lot more private sector institutions and corporations in this space. And then what happens to the term, basically, how it kind of slips. And as Anil said, how then we're using the same language, but it actually means something that is very different. But those meanings are very ambiguous and hard to pin down. So I think that is something that anthropology really has fantastic tools to interrogate.
Yes, and another thing that anthropology is really able to do is also following an object or following an idea. And I think that what all the research done around electric vehicles that we can see how, for example, in Durham, the society is transformed by the extent of coal mining and the change with electric, what the electricity and electric vehicles are bringing into perspectives is kind of interesting view. And then you also have the research done about how electricity is produced and how it impacts on our peoples, and then how also mining is done and how the fact that we need lithium is also bringing to new extractivism questions that we thought were not there anymore into question. But it's also questioning what are we going to do with all the fuel infrastructure, for example, in the African countries where it used to be extracted and still extracted. So it helps. My colleagues who are not anthropologists always tell me, well, you are complexifying things, but I tell them, oh, the world is complex. So I think anthropologists are there to remind people also that the world is complex, and what a good idea might have also drawbacks that we need to take into perspectives. And I think anthropologists are really there also for that, just to remind people that, yeah, world is more complex and modeling is wonderful, but it's not enough. So that's what this I guess it's what I can bring to complete what the other persons were just saying, the Saffron and Anya was saying, which I could fully agree with.
And just to build another thing onto Natalie's comments about complexity, I completely agree with that. And I often encounter that similar critique. It's like you're overcomplicating. We need very simple tools which you can kind of scale and communicate simply to politicians and policymakers. But I think something that anthropology has both in kind of methodological tools and theoretical concepts is ways to articulate the complexity of relationships with not only social relationships, but relationships with landscape, relationships within infrastructure, relationships with, you know, the non-human and the interplanetary increasingly, you know, as well. And that ability to look in a relational way across all of these different spheres and scales is really critical, and I think often not always incorporated in I can see in the work, in the policy spheres where I work, where sustainability is discussed, often not considered.
Thanks so much for all your comments. I knew the issue of complexity would come up, and I wonder if we just need to rephrase the work that we do instead of talking about complexity, which of course as an anthropologist I totally, you know, subscribe to. But when we're thinking about the space, for instance, being an apply club for practitioners, for people that are taking our insights elsewhere into a framework where complexity is not necessarily encouraged or even valued. How do you find that work of making complexity palatable, I guess? And you know, Saffron, you were talking about translation across multiple scales. Is it our job to translate these different insights, or is it our job to kind of just showcase the politics of how these different meanings move about? How do you translate between these different meanings? And yes, related to that question about complexity, is there another word that we need to use to market ourselves better, maybe?
I'll just jump in here and say, yes, I think there probably is. And it could be something which is a bit more like nuance. which of course doesn't capture all of the dimensions of complexity, but I think it is a challenge when we are trying to engage different audiences with our work. I think, you know, what anthropology brings though in terms of an understanding of complexity, whether that's the language you use or not, and lived experience, and putting that in the context of politics and planet is really critical. And I think what perhaps this is something this club could do, is think about some of the tools that can be used to help make those arguments more effectively. So in the work that I do, which involves working at a number of different scales, both in the UK but also globally as well, one of the kind of workarounds in this space is to think about the principles that can be moved from one place to another. In terms of methods or ways of thinking or ways of working. So it's a way of saying complexity exists, but we're not trying to take account of the complexity in all of the different parts of the system all at once. But you can learn and translate a story or an insight or a critique from one space by thinking about the transferable principles in a very pragmatic way. Personally, I think, but it does come down to individual work. I think anthropologists who are working in this applied space do have a responsibility to help to do some of that translation work as well as the critique.
Yeah, and to follow with that, there's also the thing that which is more and more becoming acknowledged is that the world is complex. So and that there is no silver bullet solution. So, so the fact that we are bringing out the complexity is not necessarily as bad as it used to be from the policymakers' perspective, because they are realizing that climate change, sustainability, transition, all those things are not going to be just a techno solution. Well, techno solution is not working, or is working only for some cases, but not for others. Yeah. And so what a solution can be in one place is not the solution for another. So those things are more and more acknowledged, not understood, but acknowledged. And then there is another thing is that Saffron was mentioning, is that we work in pluridisciplinarity. And this is also something that helps integrating the complexities. And usually when you work in pluridisciplinarity, when one anthropologist is also to bring this complexity, to make it not forget, and just to try to figure out with a perspective of pluridisciplinarity, how we can integrate this complexity into the framework. So it's not not, I guess it's less and less the anthropologist working by himself or by herself in field work.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I really enjoy this conversation, thinking about, you know, in what spaces is our role to translate different perspectives on climate sustainability versus, you know, where do we need to kind of present the critique or kind of frame these different perspectives. And I think one really interesting thing has been to see the evolution in policy circles and also kind of in the corporate space, where so many different words are being used to describe sustainability. So you have kind of ecological approaches, just transition, you know, adaptation and mitigation to resiliency. I think on working on sustainability, there's already been so much work, you know, both with anthropologists and across all other disciplines, where people are trying to use different words, because the struggle is to change all these organizations. And you can get so far with one term, but then, you know, people try another term to kind of push in a different direction. And I think because this is such an iterative process, you can kind of see this wordplay kind of evolve. And at the same time, you see people building new forms of expertise, frame themselves as ecological anthropologists or environmental anthropologists, or folks focus on climate. And so I think that's why this kind of initiative that you've taken on, Pauline, is so valuable, because we can try to bring together more folks in the applied space with folks in our academic institutions to kind of figure out where are we best situated to do certain types of work in this space. Where can we both do the documentation work on how sustainability is evolving versus where can we do this translational work working across different disciplines. I think already in academia, it can be a challenge sometimes to find departments where you're able to be working on like a very different topic than what was traditionally done in certain disciplines. So I think, there's a lot of work to be done to try to kind of craft that space. And I think that work is done both within academia as well as in different organizational forms.
Great.
And I
Thank you so much.
throw
Yeah,
in,
please go ahead. Yeah.
just throw in one more thought. I think there's also, I think a really important contribution anthropologists can make as well is to interrogate and kind of understand the arguments against action on sustainability. So obviously this is a hot political topic at the moment, but thinking about what kind of evidence is put forward to construct those arguments. He's making those arguments where the kind of discourse is going to justify a lack of action is important too.
Yes, I fully agree.
Great. So in the spirit of that kind of critique as well, I guess, what is it that an apply club in sustainability can do that is different from other apply clubs, right? A lot of what we've discussed are also applicable to just taking anthropology to any field, really. What is it about sustainability that that you find particularly exciting or new, or yes, that is making you rethink your anthropological practice in different ways?
Natalie, after you. Looks like you were about to speak.
No, go ahead. I just saw you raise your finger.
I'm waving my hands around. I mean, it is the critical talent, of the time, I think. So it's imperative, I would say, that there is as much kind of networking and action and thinking across all of the different, variations and dimensions of the term that we have looked at so far. Taking into account the innovation that is needed, the kind of political action that is needed, and all of these different spheres and all of these different scales. It is the kind of defining challenge of the 21st century. But then we also have to think about things that anthropologists have been concerned about for a really long time, like power dynamics and who's included and social justice and lots of the concepts that are incorporated in slightly unsatisfactory ways in things like the SDGs, which have a huge amount of power in terms of how they're then put into practice.
Yes, that's as you were mentioning, there is a lot of work. I mean, it's not we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is already a lot of work that's done, and the fact that sustainability is just reframing some questions that we had for decades in new ways. What it changed is the scale of the changes, and the scale also of the people who are going to be impacted by those things, and the quickness also, the rapidity of change. So this is where also it changed our practice. We used to work on the long time, and we don't necessarily have the time to work on the long time, which is really something we need to be aware of in terms of where is it still anthropology that we are doing. And so for our practice, more than what sustainability is really changing from the perspective of other applied anthropology, I think.
Yeah, no, to echo, I think, this kind of a group can really be helpful in terms of, as Saffron was saying, kind of network us all together as we're working on this space. And, and also as Natalie was saying, making sure that we're aware of what are the different strategies that we're using to act on climate sustainability concerns in the present moment, as well as we are able to develop our kind of insights as researchers. And that was, for myself, particularly, when I was doing my PhD, I also wanted to make sure I was involved in, fossil fuel divestment campaigns, in working in these kind of markets I was also studying with at the same time, with that realization that this is kind of an evolving space and, things are just moving so rapidly. I felt kind of the need to really make sure I was kind of in direct action and doing applied work as I began as an academic. So I think, being able to connect us all together to share, are the things that support our work as well as the things that are difficult is incredibly helpful.
Thanks. I'm seeing some great questions in the chat, so I think now is a good time to actually bring them in. Zina, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and just put your question directly to the panel. I like the way that you formulated as essentially how do we as anthropologists not always find ourselves in the role of the enfant terrible, the really annoying child, kind of pointing out everything that's wrong with the world. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Many thanks for these very inspiring presentations. And yeah, indeed, because it all sounds very nice and convincing, and I believe that we are all convinced that anthropology can bring a lot to many different fields of knowledge and practice. So my question is actually, how do you encounter this kind of surfaces of people who are not necessarily trained in thinking through discourses, through constructivist perspective, and how do you find an efficient way not only to explain certain things, but also to make this perspective appreciated? Because I don't have many experiences, but the experiences I've done so far are quite painful, in a sense that I actually see the results of some of my suggestions or ideas, but it doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily rewarding, so to say, for me as employee or as a team member, because it's very it's very uncomfortable position, and at the end of the day, if it's not a well-protected niche, it can be very tricky. So, like, without having a big status and a big position, what are your tips for the beginners? Thank you.
That's such a good question. I don't know if I have practical tips for the beginners, apart from build yourself your own network of people who can support you, because I think, in my experience of being in this space for like 20 years almost, not necessarily in the sustainability space, but doing in applied work, it is quite uncomfortable. It does take quite a long time, because most applied work in one way or another is trying to affect some kind of behavior change, institutional change, perhaps that takes form as policy change, and building that. And if you're going to be successful, you have to build kind of coalitions around you of supporters who can also advocate for your the arguments that you're making. So I think that the network and the support part is a really key part of that, to find other people who are also in that situation, but as colleagues have said already, to share what is working, to talk about what doesn't work. But to the earlier part of your question, which I think was, how do we make sure we're not always just being critical and telling everybody what's wrong with the world? Something that we haven't talked about yet, but I think is really important and anthropologists can contribute to, is the identification of context-specific things that work, why they work in a particular place, what are the political conditions or the cultural conditions or the planetary conditions or whatever it is that enable something to work, and then to interrogate whether that is or isn't transferable. And I think an applied network where you have people working in multiple different sectors and different territories is a great kind of what's the word? That's like having tentacles, you know, into lots of it's like having tentacles that you can mobilize for rapid research.
Yes, and then there's the fact that yes, some people won't agree with you because of some beliefs. Usually, it relates to beliefs more than anything else, and your voice is not going to be heard through them, and they are not going to listen to what you are saying. So you have to be creative to find new ways of being heard, new, as you were mentioning, network. Yeah, it's also a network of people who can bring out what you are saying. So it can be tough, it can be very tough. And I have had that the ministry when I was presenting my work, and one guy just told me, who is pretending to explain the world with 50 interviews, and blah blah blah. And so that's something that you are going to get also because we are qualitative researchers. So one of the way I found, but it's once I got a position, is to frame yourself, your research, and involve other kind of people in your research that are going to be able to make this work of translation, and then co-building the research project helps also then having your results more audible for a variety of people. But there's just not one answer about it. But also, yes, we are also identifying things that works, and that's also important.
Yeah, I think I would also agree that just the networking aspect of this is so important, both to build the research projects and then also to give yourself that kind of social support, right? When you're dealing with people who are kind of ideologically in a very different place. And yeah, sometimes there definitely can be consequences depending on what your position is when you bring together, when you kind of put forth a view of complexity that really isn't connecting to those who you're presenting with. And so I think, to that end, the network is very important, really resonating with Lauren's point in the chat that, using different methods or even research methods such as collaborative ethnography could also be helpful in building those network connections that could support your research and allow you to have a bit more, kind of acceptance by folks in different disciplines or different worldviews.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your question. I mean, those are exactly the kinds of questions that we want to ask as a network, right? And find answers in this space. So hopefully there'll be a longer kind of answer to your question as we go forward. Lauren, thanks so much for your comment and good to see you. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more about that. Have you kind of faced resistance to those kinds of methods in your own work?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for this. So I am a colleague of Anil's at MIT, where speed and scale is the popular discourse here, and especially speed and scale of technical solutions. And so being an anthropologist, Anil and I were very much on the edge at our institution. And I'm part of a really unique collaboration here at MIT that has been attempting to bridge anthropology with engineering in solution building. And so because of this pressure on speed and scale, because there's both the imperative of it, but there's also this this pressure to that, the good solutions are ones that can be scaled and ones that can be done quickly. And this so much goes against anthropological practices that are slow and that building relationships takes so much time. And so I've been working with engineers and engineering students at MIT. And so we have been, one of the things that we've been doing is collaborative ethnographic research in Mongolia to address air pollution crisis there and trying to build a decarbonization solution for households. And to address that former point, being together, doing field work with engineers and where they learn how to practice ethnography, that has been one way that we can engage in these really difficult conversations and tensions with our differences. It's not easy, but we found it to be very productive. Actually, when I tell this story a lot, one of my colleagues, my nuclear engineering colleague who I work closely with, he was like, anthropologists just want to deconstruct. Us engineers, we want to construct. And then we use that as a provocation to engage with that. And then he was really empowered by how we're creatively constructing things together through the act of deconstruction. But my point, I mean, because I'm curious to learn about these practices of how anthropology does as a practice need to move away from some of the traditional models to address the real needs of today. And so that's where my point about collaborative ethnography, I think, is one way. And I'm curious about other ways that folks have been addressing this.
Maybe just to jump in because of the engineer things that really relates to what I'm also experiencing in my work. We are trying also to change the perspective on what an engineer can be, and telling them that building, constructing is important, but repair is right now what we need. And there's this need also in perspective to change their perspective in order to better address what we are facing. And yes, co-building is definitely one of the way we can do, and also collaborative is one of the perspective that can be used, and again, engage more dialogue with other disciplines, because ethnography is kind of the hypes in many disciplines, geography, for example, but not only sociology. And they are getting also some very good perspective, and it's important also to collaborate with those disciplines in order to better frame also the problems. We were speaking of context. Context is complex, and this complexity can only be addressed with a different perspective. And so this is also a way of building our, transforming our methodology is also by more addressing other disciplines, I think.
I mean, I agree with Natalie's comments about collaboration. I think, but that's partly because so much of my work is collaborative and co-produced, so I'm slightly biased. But I do think, you know, shifting away from kind of individuals in the field to teams which are not just anthropologists and not just academics, but bringing in professionals and practitioners or members of a community, or whoever's experience is relevant to the challenge. So the work that I do with citizen scientists, which has in the past received some pushback in kind of policy circles, is about trying to break down kind of artificial divisions between, well, there are experts and there are non-experts. If we're talking about challenges that are about everyday life or play out in everyday life in different ways, then the experience of individuals, whether a member of a community or a particular population group, is just as relevant as that of a professional or that of an engineer or an academic. So I think, you know, challenging I don't want to say challenging the space of experts, because that goes into a whole difficult political argument about have we or have we not had enough of experts in society. That's not what I mean. It's about creating, it's about valuing alternative kinds of knowledge, which is obviously something that anthropologists have been doing for a very long time, but bringing that into different kinds of spaces, into into spaces with engineers, into spaces with policymakers. I think that's really critical.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all your questions. We've got another question from Enka about what KPIs and metrics have you developed from your field of research that you used to think about sustainability differently, what worked and what didn't. I might just keep that question for us to think about in breakout room, because I'm kind of worried about keeping to time for people who might have to go at 7. But that's a question that, I mean, Saffron, you've been working on quite majorly, as well as Anil probably. So yeah, do you want to just say a few words about that, and then we'll move into breakout rooms, and it'd be really nice to just get to meet everyone.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't stay beyond 7, but I'd be very happy to kind of pick up a conversation with anyone about metrics, or offline or in a separate conversation. But I think it's really critical. So one of the pieces of work I've done recently is looking at how sustainable prosperity is conceptualized in the narratives of the SDGs versus how it's then measured in terms of a kind of outcome, an expected outcome or progress towards this idea. And the SDGs offer a very expansive notion of shared prosperity, but the metrics that are used to operationalize and report on that idea are extremely narrow and focused on average household income growth for the bottom 40% of households. So it's really just kind of like rebadging a pro-poor income growth policy. So I think metrics, who decides on what they are, how they relate to decision-making processes, how they're measured, what kind of actual forms of survey data are used, is a huge question in this space.
Yeah, no, this is a key topic, and I have a paper that came out actually just in January titled Mrs. Columbo's Anti-Politics Machine. So called to that Inspector Columbo TV show, quantitative data and responsible finance, that is actually kind of also connected to the kind of existence of this launch today for an applied club. So my co-authors there is, one is an academic anthropologist, Elizabeth Ferry, and another is kind of a practitioner in sustainable finance, David Wood, who ran the Initiative for Responsible Investment at the Kennedy School. And there we're really asking the question of, are folks using metrics and data in sustainable finance naive users, or how are they aware or not aware of the implications of the metrics they use? Going to Saffron's point, thinking about the SDGs, that reminded me of, I was in a conversation with one of the professors at MIT's Media Lab, Sandy Pentland, who was active in creating the Sustainable Development Goals. We had a presentation by another researcher who's talking about kind of corporate sustainable finance data and markets. And he just said, well, all this is, unnecessary. We had the SDGs, they solve everything. But as Saffron says, it's a much more complicated picture than that. So really key topic to dive into.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your questions, your comments, your engagement. And thank you so much to all our speakers for your great contributions. It's been a perfect way to launch this new community. So thank you so much. I'll put a link to the club in the chat. We've got a LinkedIn group and we have a mailing list, so please do sign up for those. And for those of you who can stay, we'll break into breakout rooms and just kind of have an informal chat. It'd be great to hear what you're looking for with this community and what you're looking forward to. But for those of you who have to go, thank you so much for coming, and hope to see you soon.